Animals are a theological concern because they're part of creation, and that's where we begin our story with our God. He created us, He created our universe, our world, and put everything into this fine balance of nature, which we've not really been too careful about keeping in proper balance, largely because we haven't been educating ourselves properly about the place of the animal kingdom, plant life, in relation to the human race. But now with our knowledge, yes, I think it does become very much part of our theology. There's quite a lot about animals in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, particularly of course with the story of creation, and animals are lauded at various times throughout the Old Testament. We have enough in terms of fundamental principles in the Gospels to recognize that there is a value in the whole of creation and the balance of nature within creation, which includes not just human beings taking advantage of the world in which we live, by no means, but the value of the creatures that we have and the plant life and the environment in which we live. Various Catholics, spiritual leaders, saints, have from time to time really had an insight into the importance of animals and creatures within nature. Francis of Assisi, St. Cuthbert, St. Columba, St. Basil the Great, they're all figures who seem to have an insight which was not taken up so much by the general level of theology. But there's been this line throughout our history, and it's one now that I think we're becoming wise enough to recognize as of fundamental importance. Laudato Si is what we call an encyclical letter. It comes from the Pope. It's written, in this case, not just to the members of the Church, but to every living person. And it highlights that balance, that connectedness. Pope Francis is very good at this, connecting things. So he's not just talking about the environment, which everybody was expecting him to do with Laudato Si. He talks about, as in the title of the encyclical letter, on the care of our common home. He's talking about all the aspects of the way in which we're mistreating the world in which we live and mistreating the creatures and the plant life and the mineral resources that we have. So it's a really broad vision of the care for our common home, and it's highlighted in a way that no previous papal document has done. If we understand that we live in a world where there is this fine balance, something created in love by God, which he valued and saw that all that he'd made was good, as we're told in the book of Genesis, then we have to do all that we can to recognize how those cycles and balances of nature can be upheld, that animals have dignity because they're created by God. And so it's important that in whatever we're doing environmentally, that we don't just take up one particular thing and think it's unconnected to everything else. It's a way of seeing this integrated understanding of nature in our world. So it is important for us, not just members of the Church, but for all of us as part of humanity, to recognize what we have and what we must care for. There are many ways in which Christians can be aware and put into practice their faith when it comes to care for animals. We all have domestic pets around the place, and we can care for them properly. We can understand certainly that we must not cause them distress or in any way be cruel to them, but much wider than that, we've got to be educating ourselves about the way that we actually use animals without being concerned for their distress. We've begun to consider hunting and the distress that it causes animals when they are being hunted. But it also goes to the way that we provide food for our tables. This is not always done in the best possible way with the care for the animals. I wonder if many people understand abattoirs or battery farming or the distress that may be caused to animals. So there's various ways in which we can be educating ourselves, because we're surrounded by animals and we must care for those, and we must also have that wider view for animals in the wild and how they are to be protected too and given a place to live in peace. SARCS seems to me to be a flagship in bringing back those concerns to our notice as Christians about the value of creation, particularly in the welfare and the dignity of animals on planet Earth. Its work is important. It's got a great deal to do because to a large extent as Christians we're not being concerned with the animal kingdom in the way that we should have been. So to be alerted to this is very important work, and I would want to think that the message of SARCS and its practice and its education is something that's very relevant for all Christians.